themselves experiences, and must in general be accounted at least as real as the terms which they relate. What the nature of the event called superseding signifies depends altogether on the kind of transition that obtains. Some experiences simply abolish their predecessors without continuing them in any way. Others are felt to increase or to enlarge their meaning, to carry out their purpose, or to bring us nearer to their goal. They represent them, and may fulfil their function better than they fulfilled it themselves. But to fulfil a function in a world of pure experience can be conceived and defined in only one possible way. In such a world, transitions and arrivals, or terminations, are the only events that happen, though they happen by so many sorts of path. The only function that one experience can perform is to lead into another experience, and the only fulfilment we can speak of is the reaching of a certain experienced end. When one experience leads to, or can lead to, the same end as another, they agree in function. But the whole system of experiences, as they are immediately given, presents itself a quasi-chaos, through which one can pass out of an initial term in many directions, and yet end in the same terminus, moving from next to next by a great many possible paths. Either one of these paths might be a functional substitute for another, and to follow one rather than another might, on occasion, be an advantageous thing to do. As a matter of fact, and in a general way, the paths that run through conceptual experiences, that is, through thoughts or ideas that know the things in which they terminate, are highly advantageous paths to follow. Not only do they yield inconceivably rapid transitions, but owing to the universal character footnote, of which all that need be said in this essay is that it also can be conceived as functional and defined in terms of transitions, or of the possibility of such, end footnote, which they frequently possess, and to their capacity for association with one another in great systems, they outstrip the tardy consecutions of the things themselves, and sweep us on towards our ultimate termini in a far more labour-saving way than the following of trains of sensible perception ever could. Wonderful are the new cuts and the short circuits which the thought paths make. Most thought paths, it is true, are substitutes for nothing actual. They end outside the real world altogether, in wayward fancies, utopias, fictions, or mistakes. But where they do re-enter reality and terminate therein, we substitute them always, and with these substitutes we pass the greater number of our hours. This is why I called our experiences, taken altogether, a quasi-chaos. There is vastly more discontinuity in the sum total of experiences than we commonly suppose. The objective nucleus of every man's experience, his own body, is, it is true, a continuous percept, and equally continuous as a percept, though we may be inattentive to it, is the material environment of that body, changing by gradual transition when the body moves. But the distant parts of the physical world are at all times absent from us, and form conceptual objects merely, into the perceptual reality of which our life inserts itself at points discrete and relatively rare. Round their several objective nuclei, partly shared and common and partly discrete, of the real physical world, innumerable thinkers, pursuing their several lines of physically true cogitation, trace paths that intersect one another only at discontinuous perceptual points, and the rest of the time are quite incongruent. And around all the nuclei of shared reality, as around the Dyak's head of my late metaphor, floats the vast cloud of experiences that are wholly subjective, that are non-substitutional, that find not even an eventual ending for themselves in the perceptual world, the mere daydreams and joys and sufferings and wishes of the individual minds. These exist with one another indeed, and with the objective nuclei, but out of them it is probable that to all eternity no interrelated system of any kind will ever be made. This notion of the purely substitutional or conceptual physical world brings us to the most critical of all the steps in the development of a philosophy of pure experience. The paradox of self-transcendency in knowledge comes back upon us here, but I think that our notions of pure experience and of substitution, and our radically empirical view of conjunctive transitions, are Denkmittel, ways of thinking, that will carry us safely through the pass. What objective reference is. Whosoever feels his experience to be something substitutional, even while he has it, may be said to have an experience that reaches beyond itself. From inside of its own entity, it says more, and postulates reality existing elsewhere. For the transcendentalist, who holds knowing to consist in a salto mortale across an epistemological chasm, such an idea presents no difficulty, but it seems at first sight as if it might be inconsistent with an empiricism like our own. Have we not explained that conceptual knowledge is made such wholly by the existence of things that fall outside the knowing experience itself, by intermediary experiences, and by a terminus that fulfills? Can the knowledge be there before these elements that constitute its being have come? And, if knowledge be not there, how can objective reference occur? The key to this difficulty lies in the distinction between knowing as verified and completed, and the same knowing as in transit and on its way. To recur to the Memorial Hall example lately used, it is only when our idea of the hall has actually terminated in the percept that we know for certain that from the beginning it was truly cognitive of that. Until established by the end of the process, its quality of knowing that, or indeed knowing anything, could still be doubted, and yet the knowing really was there, as the result now shows. We were virtual knowers of the whole long before we were certified to have been its actual knowers by the percept's retroactive validating power. Just so we are mortal all the time, by reason of the virtuality of the inevitable event which will make us so when it shall have come. Now, the immensely greater part of all our knowing never gets beyond this virtual stage. It never is completed or nailed down. I speak not merely of our ideas of imperceptibles like ether waves or dissociated ions, or of ejects like the contents of our neighbours' minds. I speak also of ideas which we might verify if we would take the trouble, but which we hold for true although unterminated perceptually, because nothing says no to us, and there is no contradicting truth in sight. To continue thinking unchallenged is, 99 times out of 100, our practical substitute for knowing in the completed sense. As each experience runs by cognitive transition into the next one, and we nowhere feel a collision with what we elsewhere count as truth or fact, we commit ourselves to the current as if the port were sure. We live, as it were, upon the front edge of an advancing wave crest, and our sense of a determinate direction in falling forward is all we cover of the future of our path. It is as if a differential quotient should be conscious and treat itself as an adequate substitute for a traced out curve. Our experience, inter alia, is of variations of rate and of direction, and lives in these transitions more than in the journey's end. The experiences of tendency are sufficient to act upon. What more could we have done at those moments, even if the later verification comes complete? This is what, as a radical empiricist, I say to the charge that the objective reference which is so flagrant a character of our experiences involves a chasm and a mortal leap. A positively conjunctive transition involves neither chasm nor leap. Being the very original of what we mean by continuity, it makes a continuum wherever it appears. I know full well that such brief words as these will leave the hardened transcendentalist unshaken. Conjunctive experiences separate their terms, he will still say. They are third things interposed, that have themselves to be conjoined by new links, and to invoke them makes our trouble infinitely worse. To feel our motion forward is impossible. Motion implies terminus, and how can terminus be felt before we have arrived? The barest start and sally forwards, the barest tendency to leave the instant, involves the chasm and the leap. Conjunctive transitions are the most superficial of appearances, illusions of our sensibility, which philosophical reflection pulverizes at a touch. Conception is our only trustworthy